Hello and welcome back to Exothermic Plays Games. I'm Exothermic and the date today is Sunday, April 28th, 2024. That means it's the 119th day of ranking my favorite video games through each day of the year. Coming in at number 248 is Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VIII, to me, is so close to being amazing, but is instead just pretty good. However, I know for some fans of the franchise, it's the best entry, and I think that has a lot to do with how different it is from some of the others. It was the first title in the franchise to fully embrace the 3D graphics capabilities of consoles at the time and shoot for realism instead of something a little more cartoony. The character models are all based on anatomically correct designs, and much of the fantasy pretense from the title has been dropped in favor of sort of Mission Impossible vibes with light amounts of magic. This wasn't necessarily new to the franchise, and it had been moving in that direction for the last couple of titles as well, but even today it's the least traditional fantasy entry they've made. I'm not against technology in my Final Fantasy games, but I think this one went a little too far away from its roots. I mean, yes, the main antagonist winds up being an extremely powerful sorceress, but she's an anomaly in the world. To go with this change in tone, there's also a pretty drastic change in combat systems. Every character is capable of performing summons, and that's actually how you equip your character. There's no actual item equipments in this game, instead using the junction system to associate a summon, in this game called Guardian Forces, to each character, and then modifying stats by attaching spells to the different stat slots. From there, you can even do sub-attachments to modify things further. It's got a lot of layers and is a pretty intricate system, which can be a lot of fun to mess with, but ultimately, I think it's just less interesting both mechanically and thematically than a traditional equipment system. Also, hilariously, the game abbreviates Guardian Force as GF, which creates for some remarkable out-of-context dialogue. The way magic is done is also wildly different from other games. You can use the draw command to gather uses of different spells directly from enemies, or cast the available spells without using your banked quantities. Every character is a spellcaster and can cast any spell, though some are better than others based on their stats. The draw system is actually my least favorite part of the game. It feels tedious to manage and homogenizes the characters in a way that not only isn't interesting, but feels mandatory. If the spellcasting had been like any other game, like last week's Final Fantasy III video for example, that alone would have jumped Final Fantasy VIII at least 100 spots in the rankings, and that's not an exaggeration. Outside of combat, you have your typical fare of running through cities and an overworld. The environment design is actually really nice, and is one of the better aspects of the more cinematic feel the game was aiming for. The environments are bright and exciting, in contrast with much of Final Fantasy VII's dark and gloomy feel. That's not a knock against 7, of course, but a compliment to the design teams for both. Different games had different needs, and they nailed it with both approaches. It definitely helps that Nobuo Uematsu is in his prime during the PlayStation 1 era, and this game is no exception. There's some extra incentive to explore and talk to random characters walking around with the Triple Triad card game. It's a simple game of capturing adjacent cards by playing a higher number next to it, and whoever has the most cards at the end wins. You can find these cards hidden in the world, and also win them off strangers. Ultimately, I think the game is too simple to be engaging, but if you want to see more gameplay, you can also check out my Evoland video, which I ranked at number 282. That game blatantly copied the game, but it's fair use as a parody. Story-wise, the game is pretty hit or miss. The game has a decently sized cast, but is really focused on the relationship between just two characters, Squall Leonhart and Rinoa Hardily. Amidst all of the action sequences and extremely edgy outfits and weapons, there's actually a pretty good romance here. Every time Rinoa brings the usually very shy Squall out of his shell a little, it's a good time.
Be there in the corner this tiny little bar. My last night here for you. Same old songs, just once more. My last night here with you. Maybe yes, maybe no. I kind of liked it your way, how you shyly placed your eyes on me. Did you ever know that I had mine on you?
Outside of that romance, however, the story's just alright. You start off as students at a special military academy. Squall, Cypher, Zell, and Selphie are all elite students ready to graduate into an elite military operation, and you're joined by Quistis, your professor who has a very awkward and unprofessional interest in Squall. Cypher is an insufferable jerk, Squall is incapable of displaying emotion, Zell won't shut up, and Selphie is extremely determined. I choose to believe that Cypher didn't get to graduate because he was mean to the dog, but from there, the rest of the group go on military missions and quickly work up the ranks, while also discovering there's a lot more to their stories and to the world of politics than they originally anticipated. There's a few good twists in the world building, like the revelation that most of the main cast has amnesia and grew up together, but the actual narrative feels pretty dry to me, and the supporting cast is fairly lacking, especially when compared to its neighbors in the franchise. On that note, it's entirely possible I've always been too hard on Final Fantasy VII because it's sandwiched between the greatness of Final Fantasies 6, 7, 9, and 10. If nothing else, it gave me a great memory at about 6 years old when my brother got control over the music at our local bowling alley and requested Liberi Fatali. When an extremely intense choir came over the speakers in Latin, my mom had some serious concerns. Join me tomorrow as I talk about the 247th game on my list, where I dodge some barrels.